The manhwa begins on a battlefield, where we are told an unjust war is being fought. There, the king shouts at a girl named Iron to surrender, as she has no chance of winning and will only drag her followers down to hell with her. Later, we see Iron, who is badly wounded, and the king offers her pardon if she renounces her claim to the throne of her house. She says the king's word has no credibility, but he promises not to break his oath. Iron orders her troops to drop their weapons, but they resist, saying they will fight to the end. She frees them from their oath, telling them the outcome has already been decided and there's no need to sacrifice their lives. However, she stands up and says she will fight to the end of her life for the honor of her family. She charges at the king and his army, who order their soldiers to prepare when they hear someone speaking. We see a knight named Gray, our protagonist, appear on a cliff accompanied by a dozen knights. He says he swore loyalty to Iron and those who oppose her will be his enemies. He orders his knights to charge. In a scene change, we see a port some time ago where they say a supernatural monster broke the peace of the surroundings. A group of guards appear on the streets, warning citizens to hide as an undead invaded the city. Then we see the protagonist hiding from them, and a talking cat asks him what he's doing on the street if he's undead. This scares the protagonist because it's a talking cat, and his scream scares the cat too. He covers the cat's mouth and hides with him. Then he realizes it's actually a ghost-possessed cat, which the cat accepts, and also realizes it's his first time out on the street. He explains that he was born too fragile to live in the abyss, so he pretended to be a specimen of the Great Lich. But it didn't work, and while fleeing, he broke and stole many things. This scares the cat, who doesn't want problems with the Great Lich and tries to leave, but the protagonist won't let him. Iron then arrives in the city with her escorts and passes the guards after they check her identity. The protagonist asks why they were respected and he wasn't, and the cat responds that it's because they are knights. The protagonist decides he will become a knight because he wants to be respected too. In a scene change, we see the protagonist who stole armor and a guide on how to become a knight. He thinks it should be enough to become one. However, the cat tries to bite the book and demands he puts it down because he's crazy. The cat also tells him that he won't learn to be a knight with those things and that he needs a horse first and foremost. However, he can't ride one because he's a Lich. This makes the protagonist reflect, and he agrees that he needs one and decides to summon it. Suddenly, a skeletal horse named Tinitos emerges from the magic circle, wondering how he became undead, while the other two ask him to be quiet, or they'll be discovered. In a scene change, we see Iron arriving at the castle of the Lord of the Port, who is her uncle. She thanks him for remembering her and is happy to see him healthy. Her uncle praises her, saying she is very good at speaking, and his son is lucky to have a wife like her. This surprises her, and he reveals that he invited her to arrange the marriage with his son, which annoys her. She says it would be better if he gave her ideas on how to inherit the family title instead of discussing impossible things. But he tells her that her brother is the heir, to which she replies that he is a fraud and her father had no son. This enrages her uncle, who yells at her that he already agreed with the king that she would give up her name to marry his son. This disappoints Iron since her uncle promised to be loyal to her when the king died. But her uncle says he is only loyal to the king, and she is not. So Iron asks for a cloth, which she throws while saying it's enough. Back with the protagonist, the group manage to escape, and he wonders if they'll be able to see his face with the helmet on. Meanwhile, the desperate cat screams that he never agreed to help him become a knight, and that he can't become one because he's a Lich from the dark world, and knights are from the world of light. The protagonist responds that it's not a problem because he knows sacred magic. But the cat says it's impossible and tells Tinitos that he should persuade him to go back to the underworld. Tinitos refuses, saying he wants to run against the sun. So the cat gives up and asks to be killed so he can possess another body. Then the protagonist offers to turn him into an undead so he won't get tired anymore, which scares the cat. But then the cat accepts to help him become a knight. We see the guards patrolling looking for the protagonist, who they haven't found yet, and they think that maybe he died or left town. When they encounter the knight in disguise, nervous about approaching humans, but the cat tells him to keep going without looking around and do what he says. The protagonist does so and passes the guards, but they stop him and tell him he should find a place to stay instead of wandering the streets, as there is a curfew in the city due to the undead. The protagonist says it's okay, and the guards continue on their way to have a drink. The protagonist celebrates and says he's a genius for using magic to hide in the armor. Then the protagonist says it's time to find a master to make him a knight, but the cat tells him he won't find one in the middle of the night. But the protagonist doesn't understand why, so the cat has to explain that it's because they're sleeping. The protagonist agrees to do as the cat says and asks what to do now since he's excited about being a knight for the first time. So the cat suggests going to a tavern. In a scene change, we see Iron contemplating the city views while her guards ask her to rest early for the duel. She asks them if they think her decision was impulsive, but they say it's not that, but they don't understand why she accepted such harsh conditions for herself. She responds that only then would her uncle accept the duel, and they need her troops to stop the king from seizing her family's territory. And she asks them to hire mercenaries for the duel and to trust the lady they chose to serve, as she will lead them to victory. Then we see the protagonist's group arriving at the tavern, where the cat tells him to order a glass of wine and a fish for him. The protagonist enters and the waitress takes them to a table, while some mercenaries observe him, and one of them tells the leader that they should recruit him for their band. The protagonist is happy to be called a knight, and the cat learns that all the money the protagonist has is a small coin, which is the only thing he took with him as a souvenir from the Great Lich's treasure. But the protagonist tells him not to worry, as they can get more money by playing with the mercenaries. The leader's friend insists on recruiting him, saying he's winning every round of the game. And we see the cat suggesting to the protagonist to lose, as they are attracting too much attention. Then a mercenary offers to play with a big bet, and the cat tells him to refuse, but the protagonist accepts anyway. Both leave the tavern with a lot of money, but the mercenaries follow them and call him a cheater, threatening to kill him if he doesn't give up his loot. But the protagonist calls Tenidos and mounts it to fight the bandits. They recognize him as a knight and try to pull him off the horse, but Tenidos starts its attack and knocks them all down in a matter of moments. This surprises both the leader of the band and the cat. In a scene change, we see the audience arriving at the arena for the duel. They comment that the gentleman will compete with a famous person from another place, and that there hasn't been so much excitement in the port for a long time. Among them are the band of mercenaries accompanied by the protagonist, who say they were paid a lot of money to participate. The leader says that with the protagonist's skills, it will be a piece of cake, which excites him because he thinks he will receive his knight title this way. However, the leader says they were given temporary titles for the tournament because they couldn't participate without being knights. This leaves the protagonist unsatisfied because he still wants to be a real knight. Then we see the Count warning Iron that she will lose a lot of prestige if she loses, and that he is concerned about the family's reputation if that happens. But she responds that he doesn't really care about that, and that she will keep her promise if she loses, so she hopes he will do the same if the opposite happens. Then the rules of the tournament are announced, in which each side must send a knight to fight one-on-one, who will be eliminated if they lose or surrender, and the winner of each round will have the right to decide if the next round will be a battle on horseback or on foot. And so it will continue until all the knights of one side are eliminated. If the Count loses, he must swear loyalty to Iron, but if she loses, she must marry his son. Then the Count's knights are allowed in, numbering in the hundreds, while Iron's are only a few dozen, which causes the people and the Count to mock her. She asks if the mercenaries have arrived, and her guard confirms that they have, so the tournament begins. Iron's knights initially have the upper hand, but slowly the Count's numbers begin to show. So Iron's guard asks to enter the battle, but she tells him not to rush and to call the mercenaries because she plans to use them to tire out the Count's knights. In a scene change, we see the leader of the mercenaries telling his men that the lady called them and not to disgrace themselves, which surprises them because it's only the first round. Iron's guard reminds them of the importance of the match for the Betcher house, so he hopes they will help their lady win. But even they have doubts about their overwhelming numerical disadvantage, because even if they do their best, they cannot guarantee the outcome. The guard thinks it is a great shame that they have to resort to a group of gangsters, when suddenly the protagonist appears and asks if he can be made a knight. He is told that the lady already granted him the title, but the protagonist refers to being a real and sealed knight. The guard tells him he is being too ambitious, but Iron interrupts him and tells the protagonist that the title must be earned through merit, so if he defeats 50 men in the tournament, she will grant it to him. The cat is about to refuse when the protagonist accepts, leaving both him and the guard speechless, but not Iron, who says she will then wait to see him in action. The cat scolds the protagonist, who says not to worry, because Tenidos can kick 100 of them. But the cat shows him that everyone has chosen to fight on foot, and to get to Tenidos he must win a fight in that modality. So he asks if he knows anything about fencing, to which the protagonist responds terrified that he doesn't. Iron returns to watch the competition, and the Duke tells her he didn't think she would trust the mercenaries of the Red Scorpion, so her family must be in decline. But she tells him to wait a little longer to know if it is, when we see that the leader of the mercenaries, named Paz, is asked to enter the ring. He says it's time to get more serious with the job. And a moment later we see him easily defeat a soldier, and that he has won 5 games in a row amidst the cheers of the people. So the Duke asks his butler with a macabre smile to put in a special guy, so that the mercenaries know the consequences of going against him. The audience comments that the Count's knights are trash compared to Paz, and that he could probably win another 10 games. When the next Count's knight appears, everyone is stunned to see that he is a giant. He stands in front of Paz and tells him they are going to have fun, and he says he'll have to ask the lady for a ride. While we see that the protagonist can't handle the sword, and says he'd better think of a magic that can move on its own. Although the cat tells him he should just give up. The audience says that the guy is a terrifying monster, and the butler begins the 12th duel. The giant attacks Paz directly, but he dodges the blow. Then he counterattacks, but his sword breaks without harming his opponent, who attacks again. Although Paz thinks he can dodge it, he fails and is thrown with force until he crashes into a fence. The Count laughs satisfied and says that's what happens when they go against him. However, Paz gets up again in pain, even though his ribs are broken, and says he will ask the lady to double the payment. The giant attacks again, but Paz jumps and avoids the blow. With his broken sword, he manages to hit the monster in the eyes, leaving him blind. Paz then launches himself as soon as he touches the ground again and cuts his opponent's ankles with one blow. The opponent calls him a bastard and accuses him of playing dirty as he collapses defeated on the sand. To which Paz responds that he is not a bastard, but the mercenary leader Paz, the most beloved of the port, while we see him spitting blood as he speaks. So Iron asks them to call the doctor and replace him. We see that time has passed and the evening has come to the town, where the cat asks the protagonist what he is doing there instead of fighting in the tournament. The protagonist replies that, since he can't use the sword, he is making a weapon he can use. The cat tells him it's okay, but if he doesn't hurry, the tournament will probably end. So the protagonist hurries and sets off on his way back. The fight continues until midnight, and we are told that only 6 of Iron's men remained able to fight. Although they were weaker, the Count's knights relied on their numbers to overwhelm the lady's knights, and they still had 61 fighters remaining. We see Paz watching the clashes from a rooftop, while saying that Iron's knights are very brave, but it's impossible to win 6 against 61 just using his brain. Then the lady's guard appears looking for Paz, who asks him what he wants from him. This angers the guard, who accuses him that half of his mercenaries surrendered halfway through the fight and asks where his knightly spirit is. But Paz replies that they are not knights, and that they were paid to fight, not to give their lives. This angers the guard even more, but he manages to contain his anger and asks where the protagonist is, but Paz doesn't know either. Then the guard hears that the Count has won again, so he returns running, saying that they cannot let him continue his winning streak, and that he is now the only one who can fight. When suddenly a terrible sound catches his attention. He discovers that it's the protagonist, carrying a giant door with him, who also asks how many people are left on the Count's side. The Count is stunned at seeing the protagonist's weapon, while Iron thinks there is hope, and that maybe the protagonist will be able to do it. Immediately, the guard tells him that there are more than 50 left, and that he can do it. So the protagonist is glad to arrive in time, and throws the door in the middle of the ring, then stands on top of it, and tells the Count's soldier that he is ready to start the game. However, the soldier is speechless, quickly drops his weapon on the ground, and surrenders to the protagonist on his knees. So the protagonist calls the next fighter, but the Count's soldiers panic and say they don't want to go, fighting among themselves to decide whose turn it is to fight. The Count becomes furious because the protagonist used the door of his palace as a weapon, and says that it is a shame that he will never tolerate. The audience watches the protagonist in amazement, wondering who he is, and they realize that he is carrying the door of the Count's palace. Someone wonders how things ended up like this. His butler informs him that the situation is bad because the knights prefer to give up their titles rather than fight the protagonist. But they still have a chance if they change the fighting style to a cavalry battle, and the Count understands that this is the only way. We see the protagonist getting bored because his next opponent doesn't show up, when the Count calls him and praises his strength. And as the organizer of the tournament, he asks to see his cavalry skills, as he is sure they are as impressive as his physical strength. This angers Iron, who reminds the Count that the winner decides how the next battle will be fought. But he tells her that his men will not fight if she does not accept the battle, so the tournament will not go ahead, which she does not want. And she asks the protagonist again if he accepts the request for a horse battle, to which he says yes, but only if she sends all her knights at once to fight him, which surprises Iron. The Count is also surprised and asks the protagonist if he really wants to fight all his soldiers, to which the protagonist responds yes, because if they continue to refuse to fight, he will not have 50 defeated people. Iron's guard tells him he is crazy because he cannot face so many alone. while the Count says he can and accepts the deal as it is a wonderful offer. The guard thinks it's crazy and that they should stop the match. When Iron steps forward and asks the protagonist if he is making that request with full confidence, to which he replies yes, and that he will bring her victory. So she accepts it and tells him to show the Count his bravery with all his might. The protagonist jumps off the door and thanks her for her kind words. And Tenidos enters the arena jumping from a roof. The Count shouts at his butler to make his knights also get in the ring, and he orders them to prepare for the battle. The soldiers mount and form a formation, while saying that their honor depends on this battle, and they must knock him down and end this farce. Then the cat realizes the situation and asks the protagonist what the hell is going on. The Count's knights charge against the protagonist, while one of them says that it is the perfect opportunity to regain the momentum of a strike, and he attacks the protagonist with his lance, but he dodges it and counterattacks with his sword. But the soldier realizes that he suffered no harm, so he asks the protagonist what he is doing and if he knows how to use a sword, to which he responds that he just wanted to test it out, because Tenidos can take care of his pony with just one hoof. This angers the soldier for mocking him, and he says he will kill the protagonist. The cat scolds the protagonist for angering all the riders and asks him what they are going to do now, to which he replies that they will have to use the old lick method since swords don't work, and he invokes 3 powerful spells around him. The soldier says it's time to attack because the protagonist stopped, but the 3 turn to look at him with evil smiles. Suddenly, 2 soldiers are hit out of nowhere and begin to scream to disperse, while we see the protagonist easily plow through their ranks, and the soldiers shouting that he cannot be stopped. One of them tells them not to be scared, as the protagonist is an expert horseman, so his weakness is that his horse be stabbed to death, and he uses his lance to hurt Tenidos. But a magical barrier stops the attack, and Tenidos knocks down the soldier with one blow. The protagonist continues his advance while we see the massacre he is leaving behind. The protagonist laughs because Tenidos is happy with the battle, and the wounded soldier says that the protagonist is as terrifying as a monster, while we see him standing with the full moon behind him. The Count asks terrified how is this possible, and says that the protagonist must be cheating somehow, while Iron's guard is surprised and says that the bastard did it for real. Then we see Iron lifting the protagonist's sword and giving it to him. The protagonist thanks her and asks if he can be made a knight as he defeated the 50 people, to which Iron replies yes, that she will fulfill her promise and grant him the title of knight with a seal. This explodes with excitement for the crowd, who enters the arena to cheer him on. Then we are told that at that moment, a knight was born who would change the whole world. We are told that the Count angrily left the scene, while the public cheered for the protagonist and tossed him in the air along with the cat as a celebration, which scared him because he thought they were going to break his bones because they had found him out. We see a citizen telling his friend to hurry to the castle because the protagonist is throwing gold coins and gems. The citizens celebrate and wish him a long life. The cat asks the protagonist what he is doing, and he responds that he is distributing the treasure he found to the poor, while continuing to throw the riches. Then we are told that it all started the night before, where we see Iron granting the protagonist the title of Knight of the Silver Moon. She apologizes for the modest ceremony, but hopes that he will walk by her side in the future. The protagonist responds that he will, and will fight for her until death. Then we see the palace, and a servant guides the protagonist to his room to rest. Once they are alone, the cat sighs and, while climbing onto the bed, says that the world has really gone crazy as a Lich has become a knight. The protagonist starts laughing and celebrating with a shout that he has become a knight, while the cat watches him and thinks that his laughter had a taste of Lich's malice. Then the protagonist stops and says that there are still many things he doesn't know, so he must hurry and start learning. The cat tells him to simply be quiet and go to sleep, but the protagonist asks him not to, as he needs his advice. The cat explains that poor does not refer to a specific person, and that compared to the Count, everyone in the port is poor. Additionally, the castle is full of treasure, so he can find it himself, and then goes to sleep. So we return to the present, and the cat understands that the protagonist stole the Count's castle, which he confirms, so the cat says screw him. In a scene change, Iron's guards visit her in her office. She asks them what they want from her so early, and one of them asks if she really trusts the protagonist. She says they both witnessed his bravery and they need his strength. But the guard says they do not know his past, and he did not even take off his helmet during the ceremony, so he could be an agent of the king. But Iron responds that if he were, she would not be sitting there talking to them. This leaves the guard speechless, and she tells him that he is a reliable man, so she hopes they will not talk about it in the future. Then one of Iron's soldiers enters, shouting that he brings bad news, and tells them that the protagonist stole the Count's treasure, which he is throwing from the tower of the castle. This leaves the guards stunned, and causes Iron to break her pen. She says she will go to him, while the guards ask her to calm down and lower her sword. We are told that Iron never considered herself a competent lord, and we see her training in fencing with her father. She defends herself by blocking a blow, but the knight's strength makes her fall, and he throws his sword in the air. Her father tells her that there is no way she can become the next great duchess if she falls so easily. However, we are told that she had a quality that she hadn't even noticed, and that is that she is good at putting on an act. And we see that inside her mind she is upset, but on the outside she asks her father to try again, without showing any emotion. Then we see Iron wondering in her mind what the protagonist is doing, and if he is trying to complicate her life, because even though the Count lost, he is still avoiding signing the letter. And we see an image of Iron making the protagonist and the Count and his guards, who are sure that is what she imagined, pay. In a scene change, we see the Count accusing the protagonist, whom he calls an armored thief. He says he is only giving the wealth he found to the poor like any knight would do. But the Count tells him that is not any wealth, but the treasure that belongs to him, and he calls him a despicable thief. Then the protagonist understands that those treasures belong to an owner, but blames the Count for not putting his name on them so he would know. At that moment we see Iron and her guards close to the scene, and the guard suggests to her to stop the protagonist before the problem becomes too big. But Iron thinks that the combination of the protagonist and the Count is a magnificent opportunity. And we are told that, in addition to putting on an act, Iron has another essential quality to be a lord, which is an incredibly sharp vision for opportune moments. The Count tells the protagonist that is enough, and orders him to bring his master. When Iron shows up and asks if her uncle called her, in addition to having been avoiding her, so she thought he didn't want to keep his word. The Count is surprised to see her, and the protagonist greets her casually, which angers the Count. Then Iron approaches him and tells him in his ear that if he refuses to keep his word, she has the right to immediately deprive him of his title, which angers him even more, but he ends up giving in and handing the letter over to Iron. But as he leaves, he warns her not to think she can fight against the king just because she has a few troops of her own, to which she responds that he doesn't need to be angry about that. The protagonist asks her worried if he did something wrong, but she tells him that no, he actually did very well. Because thanks to the pressure he put on the Count, he forgot that Iron cannot take away his title before becoming the Grand Duchess, which scares the guards, who tell her that her inner demons are coming out again and she must control herself. So she apologizes and tells the protagonist that he did a great job, but it's wrong to steal from others, and that although she will help him compensate this time, if it happens again she will deduct it from his salary, which the protagonist accepts. Then Iron tells everyone to pack up, as they will leave the port since they have the letter. As they leave, the protagonist takes the opportunity to ask the cat what the salary is, and he thinks that only an unreliable master like Iron would accept a lunatic knight like the protagonist, so the future is bleak. The protagonist leaves the city with the knights and meets the army of Iron. He is surprised by their numbers and wonders how he didn't see them during the battle. The cat clarifies that these are ordinary soldiers, and only knights were allowed to participate in the tournament. The cat notices that the Count hired 1,000 people by contract, and he has a feeling that something bad will happen. As night falls, Iron's army camps on the road, and a soldier seeks out the protagonist and tells him that Horace, Iron's guard, requested his visit to the lady's tent. Horace later tells Iron that he cannot accept her request to use the Count's letter to force more lords to join her side, fearing that something bad will happen if the protagonist stays by her side if he and Abby leave. Iron questions his ability to stop the protagonist if he becomes evil, leaving Horace speechless. She then asks him and the protagonist to act as reliable messengers if they cannot stop him. The protagonist arrives at the tent, and both guards look at him with disdain, making him wonder if he did something wrong. Horace takes him aside and tells him that he is counting on him to keep Iron safe. The guards leave, causing the protagonist to panic and wonder why they called him, and thinks that security is a person. He considers asking Iron who or what security is and curses the cat for sleeping at that hour. Iron asks if he is nervous, and the protagonist tells her that he is not but doesn't know what to do. She tells him to stay by her side and knock down anyone who tries to attack her, which he easily understands. Iron then comments that he is a weirdo for refusing to remove his helmet and not knowing the knight's oath. She doubts he is from that country or even human, and in normal circumstances, she would not have accepted a knight like him. The protagonist denies it all nervously, but she reassures him that she is not questioning his identity. She tells him that he has been her knight since he promised loyalty, no matter what he was or did before, and she will pay for what he is and ensure that he is not mistreated. Meanwhile, the cat wakes up and discovers a suspicious person heading towards Iron's tent. The protagonist tells Iron that she is a magnificent lady and he will always be loyal to her. She tells him to stop talking as it is time to receive the guests, and an assassin suddenly jumps in from the roof. We are told about the group of assassins known as the Crows, who kill anyone as long as you are willing to pay. And among them, the assassin called Spectre is the most fearsome, as he kills for fun. He tells Iron to scream, as fear is his food, when the protagonist knocks him down by throwing a sword at him. She tells him that a sword is not for that, when the assassin is about to attack again, so the protagonist stands between Iron and him. The assassin attacks the protagonist so fast that he doesn't see him move, and tells the protagonist that he is now cut into pieces. But he starts laughing, and the assassin realizes that his sword is broken. The protagonist calls him a liar for saying that he had cut him into pieces, and throws a punch to slap the assassin. The assassin says he can easily block it, but the punch hits him and sends him flying. Iron wonders what's going on, and if they both don't understand the whole picture, and she explains that the assassin broke his sword from the beginning, and only swung his sword in the air a dozen times. So she wonders if the protagonist didn't realize it, or if both of them are crazy, and she orders the protagonist to get rid of him. Then he asks her if she knew that assassins were coming, and she tells him that yes, because they usually appear once every 3 days. And since her guards left, she assumed they would appear, which surprises the protagonist, and she explains that, because of power and money, many people want her to disappear from the world. We are told that everything started with the death of the Duke of the Becher House 2 months ago, who left in his will that Iron would inherit his title and properties. But an illegitimate son named Jones appeared, and by law, an illegitimate child had no right to the inheritance. The problem is that Jones appeared because of the king, who had the power to grant him the right of succession, which was an obvious conspiracy against Iron since the king wanted to take over the Becher's territory without bloodshed. Some refused to help due to fear of the king's authority, while others sought to take advantage of the situation. Since her father's death, many wanted Iron to disappear, and murder became a common occurrence for her. In the White City, the capital of the Becher Duchy, the guards see Iron's return and order the gates to be opened to welcome her. A girl there says she returned alive as expected and would like to see for herself if the rumors of her meeting a brave knight at the port are true. Iron and her army enter the city, and the citizens are surprised by their arrival and that the protagonist is by her side, who they say can defeat 100 soldiers. The cat asks the protagonist if he understood everything Iron told him the night before about her situation, but he says no because there were too many words, but he understood that he must defeat the king or he will lose his knighthood. Then the protagonist begins to observe the city and says he likes it because it is a lively place, while a boy offers him fruit. Iron says she accepts it as a compliment, that the White City is lively, and that she must watch over it to keep it alive. She also tells him that she will prepare a new armor for him and his warhorse, so she asks if he has any specific requirements. The protagonist asks about the armor, and she tells him that it must have a dignified outfit as a member of the Becher family, which must be made with the appropriate style, material, and weight. But the protagonist says he doesn't know much about it, so he will do whatever she suggests, and Iron tells him that he is really carefree. Then she tells him that when they settle down, she will invite all the nobles of the city to a dance because it is important that they know she returned alive with her troops and horses intact. And as her guardian knight, the protagonist must attend the dance with her because many people want to meet him, and she tells him to prepare himself. While the protagonist silently suffers, we see an angel hovering over the city, watching over the protagonist, who says it's an immature Lich, so he asks to process the request. Someone tells him that, according to the treaty they signed with the Liches, they must observe the situation and refrain from taking action, to which the angel agrees. Inside the palace, the protagonist admires his new armor, which he loves because of its pattern. The cat can't believe they only measured the size of the breastplate and made it, and says that Iron is too generous with the protagonist. To which he responds that yes, she is an excellent lady. Then the cat asks him if he is ready for the dance that night. But the protagonist says he doesn't know what a dance is, so the cat explains that it's a party where everyone gathers and dances. But the protagonist doesn't know what dancing is either, so the cat shows him, and the protagonist starts to imitate him. He says it looks like some kind of mystical ritual, so it's great, and he says he loves to dance. At that moment, one of Iron's maids arrives and asks the protagonist if he is ready. He asks her to wait a moment, and then asks her what he can do for her. She asks him to follow her if he's ready, as the lady is waiting for him. The protagonist follows her and they arrive at Iron's room, where she tells her maid she can leave. And the protagonist blushes at the beauty before his eyes, but doesn't think of her, but of the fabric, which he says is so beautiful that it would be magnificent for a wizard's tunic. She asks the protagonist if he's ready, and he says yes, so she offers him her hand to descend. However, he doesn't take it, and asks the cat why he doesn't leave, so he has to explain to him that she wants him to help her down the stairs. But the protagonist asks again why he should do it, to which the cat tells him to stop asking and help her, and finally he takes her hand. Both are about to descend when the protagonist praises Iron's dress and asks if he can wear it, which surprises her, and she asks if he wants to wear a dress, since he is supposed to be a man. But the protagonist asks if he is, which confuses them both. Then the cat scolds him and asks if he wants to reveal his identity, so the protagonist asks Iron to forget what he said, that he doesn't want to wear it that much, and that the armor is enough. But Iron wonders why the protagonist doesn't take off his helmet or armor, in addition to not wanting to mention his past and liking pretty dresses, so she suspects it could be a girl. The butler then announces the entrance of Iron to the ball, who appears accompanied by the protagonist. The guests bow and greet the lady. Then they notice the presence of the protagonist and start to talk rumors about him. Some say he defeated the Count's knights without help, or that they saw him tear a tree out of the ground with his own hands. Iron holds a glass of wine and welcomes the nobles to the Becher family's ball, hoping they will have fun and their families will remain united and maintain good relationships as in the past. Meanwhile, two people are seen observing from the background. Iron adds that she hopes to resolve their disagreements once and for all and drinks from her glass. Then the girl from the back tells her grandfather that the lady is referring to him, and he says it's okay. The protagonist asks who the old man is, and she tells him that he is Lord Gregory, whose family is famous for their wealth and military strength, and a leading candidate to win the battle against the king, even though he already rejected their requests. The protagonist asks if that's not bad, to which she replies that there is still a chance since he attended that night. Iron walks up to Gregory and greets him, saying it's been a long time, to which he responds not that long and invites her to the first dance, which annoys the protagonist because he has to be near her and tries to get closer. But the girl stops him, saying it's her grandfather's dance with Iron. The protagonist asks if he can follow them, and she says no, but if he really wants to dance, she can accompany him. But the protagonist wonders if she also broke her ankle, and the cat warns him that he must keep his distance from her for her sake. The protagonist takes it literally and moves away, so the cat scolds him. This causes the girl, named Shelley, to cry, saying the protagonist doesn't consider her beautiful enough. The cat thinks she's an expert and tells the protagonist he needs to solve the problem or they will have a big problem. He asks what he should do, and the cat tells him to say she's the most beautiful woman in the world. So the protagonist kneels down and does it, which pleases Shelley, and he asks her again if they can dance. The protagonist asks the cat what he should do, and he says he can't avoid it, so the protagonist takes her hand and says he would be honored. Shelley thinks he finally took care of him, although it was humiliating, and she would like to see what the protagonist is really like under his helmet. Meanwhile, the cat thinks he needs to prepare for it because he will suffer the consequences of getting that fool to dance. The dance continues, but the protagonist is not good at dancing and keeps stepping on Shelley's feet. He apologizes because it's his first time dancing, and she says it's also her first time dancing with a man in armor. So she tells him to take his time to learn how to lead her, but the protagonist tells her she should lead because she dances better, to which Shelley responds that it's not about that, and that he should lead because he is a man. So the protagonist wonders why they insist that he is a man, and if he can really be one, although he says that dancing is very fun, and Shelley agrees. Lord Gregory and Iron see them both dancing, and the Lord wonders why he is still wearing armor at the dance, to which Iron responds that nowhere is really safe and asks her uncle if he can reconsider the request he had made before. Gregory admits that she is good and very talented, but says that it is not enough, and the Gregory family only supports those destined to win, which is the family motto, which is why they have been able to survive for 1,000 years. And Iron admits that it's true, so it's a pity. Shelley and the protagonist finish dancing. She tells him that he learns fast and asks him to accompany her for a walk outside, to which the protagonist agrees. The protagonist escorts the girl outside to a fountain, where she sits and checks her foot, which swelled up because the protagonist stepped on it. She says it will be a problem because she can't go back to the dance with a swollen foot, and asks the protagonist if he has nothing to say since it was his fault. The protagonist apologizes, but she tells him she wasn't referring to that, but to look for some medicine to apply to her foot. So the cat realizes that Shelly wants to flirt with him, and the protagonist asks what she means. And she explains that she wants to flirt, then make love and reproduce with him, where he will be completely trapped. The protagonist doesn't understand what she means by reproduce, and the cat apologizes because it's a difficult word for an undead. Then the protagonist kneels in front of her, and although he doesn't understand very well, he understands that what she wants is help to heal her foot. He takes it in his hands, which startles Shelly when the protagonist conjures healing magic on it. Shelly is surprised to see it, as it is not usual for a knight to be able to use magic. But when the healing is over, a noble boy appears with a bouquet of roses, asking what he's doing. He says it was for Shelly, as he was worried about her, and can't believe he held a lady's foot with his hand. And he asks if all the Becher family knights are so shameless, so he challenges him to a duel. The protagonist is about to accept, when the cat stops him and tells him he will have political problems if he fights someone from the family that Iron is trying to win over. But Shelly says she's a sinner, as two men are going to fight over her. At that moment, we see the angel, who saw the protagonist, an undead, use divine magic, which he finds interesting. Iron realizes that there is noise outside and wonders if something happened when one of her guards arrives and tells her that the protagonist seems to have insulted Shelly. She thinks it's not too much of a coincidence at this point, so she asks the guard to take her to the scene. In the conflict, the boy keeps asking the protagonist if he won't explain it, but the protagonist doesn't understand what he should explain. The boy orders him to explain why he humiliated Shelly, but the protagonist doesn't know what he's talking about and suggests that he should have said harassment instead. The boy then asks Shelly to explain what the protagonist did to her, but she says it's a misunderstanding and that he only helped her with her injured foot. However, he argues that there is no medicine that can heal wounds without leaving scars, so the protagonist must have tricked her. The crowd around them believes this version, and the protagonist feels overwhelmed because everyone is using words he doesn't understand. The cat warns him that if he doesn't explain everything quickly, he will lose his reputation. At that moment, Iron and Gregory arrive, and the boy tells them that he found the protagonist touching Shelly. Lord Gregory gets angry, but Iron asks to hear all versions first. The protagonist then explains that he hurt Shelly at the dance by stepping on her foot, so he helped her heal it. Shelly suggests that the protagonist do it again in front of everyone, but he says he can't use it again for a short time because his hand was burned by using divine magic. It will take days to recover, and he won't be able to control the armor if he loses his hands. The boy claims that this is just an excuse, and Gregory tells Iron to keep her men under control before asking for her help. But she says she trusts her knights and will investigate who is really lying because she won't let anyone defame the honor of the Becher knights. Lord Gregory suggests she stay out of her family's affairs as he leaves and tells Shelly to follow him. The next day, we see a large army arriving at the White City, and Horace says that Count Fletter is the one who came to his aid with his army, so the situation turns in their favor. However, Iron thinks that he just returned to the city, and the Count arrived on the second day, so she suspects it is too much of a coincidence. She asks Horace about the person who accused the protagonist, and he tells her that it is one of Shelley's fanatical suitors, named Matthew, so he must have accused the protagonist out of jealousy. Iron then asks Horace to lower the drawbridge to greet the Count. Fedler tells her he hopes he did not arrive too late, but she responds that he arrived just in time. Fedler asks if Gregory has already made his position clear, but she hesitates to respond. Fedler suggests tying him up and beating him until he decides, but she asks him not to do that. He says he's just joking, but it's true that he'll only decide when it really hurts. Iron then asks about what's in the wagons he brought, and Fedler tells her it's his son Jimmy, who can't be in the sun because of his illness. She asks to see him, and Fedler agrees. Iron approaches the carriage, and Jimmy greets her, so she apologizes for getting his father into trouble. But Jimmy tells her it's okay. Iron says he's very cute, and then asks Fedler to come into the castle. In Iron's office, her guards tell her that the situation has finally improved. But she says that the timing of Fedler's appearance is too coincidental, and Jimmy doesn't look like his father and has white hair. In a scene change, we see Matthew arriving with Fedler, asking for another chance and apologizing to him for not making sure the protagonist was outside the Becher camp. He says he didn't expect Iron to offend the Gregorys by defending him. We see the protagonist writing about a book in his room, and the cat asks him what he's doing. He tells the cat that he's making a list of things he must do as a knight, which Iron told him during the ceremony, that made him one. He says that liches usually don't swear, but they keep their promises, so he needs to fulfill them as soon as possible. He will start with the one that says he must help those in need, so he will go out into the city to look for someone like that. But the cat suggests that he doesn't do it, and when the protagonist asks why, a lady throws a tomato at him and calls him a scoundrel. The protagonist wonders why people are no longer kind to him, but the cat tells him that it's not personal, but against the Becher family, who spread rumors to make him look bad. However, the protagonist doesn't feel bad about it, as he pities those who believe rumors without bothering to find out the truth. Then we see Matthew with an assassin, who are surprised that the protagonist did not get angry. But Matthew says it doesn't matter because the other side is ready to kill. The protagonist continues through the streets when a boy comes running and asks for help, to which the protagonist immediately responds saying he will do it no matter what it is. And we see Shelley's carriage stop because of the crowd, and the driver tells her that it has to do with the protagonist. The boy tells the protagonist that his sister was kidnapped by mobsters, and the cat tells him it's an obvious trap. But the protagonist says he will still help, as the fact that it's a trap is another reason to act. The group arrives and finds a gang of children who have the boy's sister. He tells them to let her go, but the leader throws her in the air, so the protagonist jumps and catches her. He wonders how he can be ambushed by unarmed children, but then the boy apologizes to him in his mind and begins to scream that the Becher Knight has taken someone captive. The gang leader does the same and says the protagonist is a scum who doesn't even spare children. The girl then also starts screaming for help and for the protagonist to let her go, leaving him stunned and wondering what the hell is going on. And that's how the first part of this manhwa ends. If you've made it this far in the video, let me tell you that you've been one of the few people to get here, so comment the word Paladin in the comments. Remember to subscribe so you don't miss any videos. With that said, see you in the next video.